Hi guys, welcome back to the workshop. Today what we're going to look at is air compressors. Originally when I started putting the script together for this, I had regarded an air compressor as an add-on to the workshop to give you sort of increased capability or as a useful tool. But as I was writing through the script or generating the script, I started to come to the realization that I'd regard an air compressor as being a sort of a workshop essential. I don't think there's a week that goes by whereby I don't use it to inflate a tire, either on a lawnmower or a car or a trailer, or clean something with a little air gun. So that's the background to the video. Now what I'll do is I'll break this video down into three sections. The first one, first section, I'll just take some shots of what you can use an air compressor for and some of the tools that you can attach to it. Some of them I'll talk through, other ones I won't because they're quite loud. The second section then we'll unbox this cheap air compressor that I bought. I got this from an Irish company called Screwfix. I think it was 120 euros, which equates to about $135 or just over 10,000 rupees. I noticed I have a good few Indian viewers, so welcome to you too. And then the third section of the video will be going through some of the more technical details, like what's free air delivery and maybe a little bit of maintenance. And what I'll do is I'll link these, or I'll break these into chapters, and they should be time-stamped down at the bottom of the screen there if you hover over the little bars with your mouse. Okay, off we go. So now what we have here is lawnmower, obviously with a flat wheel or a flat tire, and it's also quite dirty as well. So what we'll do now is we'll use a blowgun to clean this off, and then we'll use the tire inflator to bring the pressure back up in the tire. Now, as regards blowguns, you can get a number of different styles. This would be sort of a little pistol style job with a button on it there to get air to flow through it. There is other styles as well then. This would be sort of a more focused or more nozzle based one for getting in and out of more awkward areas. And then you can actually get much bigger ones as well. This would be a much longer one, which I use for blowing out the centers of air filters and things like that. To be honest, it doesn't make a huge difference. I'd start off with something with a nozzle on it anyway. So what we'll do is we'll connect our air first, and then we'll use this to clean off the wheel, and we'll move on to the air inflator then. Now we have our tire clean and ready to inflate, and the first thing we do is we take off the dust cover on the valve. This stops dust and dirt getting in and damaging the little valve inside. Just generally they're just black plastic or metal covers. We'll just show you one there. Okay, that's what they look like. Just to show you while I'm here of what a valve looks like, you can buy valve removal tools for small money, 7 or 8 euros, $10, 80 rupees, somewhere around there, probably cheaper if you shop around for them. Basically what they do is there's a little key on the end of them, and they fit into the back of the valve, and then the valve can be unscrewed. So that's a valve, and that's the way they work. There's a little pin in the middle of them, so we stick him back in. If you did hear air escaping out of that valve, you might have to replace the little valve itself, and they're not very big money. Right, that's our valve back in. So what we have here now connected to our air gun is a cheap air inflation tool. Basically it works, you press the button, air comes out of this end here. So that's the way that works. This end is held on to the valve with a little spring-loaded mechanism. You might be able to see it operating in and out there if I focus on that. Okay, so we attach that on, and we'll say I've written down on the bottom of the tire here, I need 27 psi, which is pounds per square inch, and that equates to about 2 bar in sort of metric pressure terms. So when you let off the trigger, the pressure in the system should measure on that gauge. So up we go, keep going. Okay, and if you want to let pressure out, there's generally a button either on this itself that you have to press it, or on this particular instance the button's separate and it lets air out of the tire if you overinflate it. Okay, Right, we're pretty much on par there. So we take off our inflation tool and we stick on back on our dust cap, and our tire's ready to go. Okay. Now we have two tools laid out here. One is called a needle scaler, and the way that operates is basically a hammer action that operates on a pile of loose needles, particularly useful for getting rid of very scaly rust. And I found a piece of material here which is particularly nasty. The second sort of tool that we'll demonstrate here is a die grinder. So basically what that is just a high-speed rotary tool, and there's a sanding flap disc attached to it. I did a video on die grinder, so you can find more information on die grinder specifically in that video. What we'll do now is we'll just take some of the rust off of this with the needle scaler and then give it a rub with the die grinder, just show you how you can use an air compressor for tools. Now, needless to say, this is an operation where you need safety glasses. Right, away we go. Now, as we can see here, we gave that a rub of the needle scaler first, and it took some of the heavy pitting off, and then we used the die grinder with a sanding attachment on it just to take off some more of it. Obviously, this piece of steel is probably a little bit far gone to recover into, you know, anything sort of reasonable looking, but you can see the principle involved anyway of how you'd use a needle scaler and a die grinder to recover steel or to try and get rust out of a particularly odd location. Right, on to our next tool. So now, what you'll commonly see air compressors used for is running impact tools. This here is an impact gun. It's an old Ingersoll Rand one. Some of these have been sort of overtaken with battery powered impact tools, but here they still have their use in the workshop, and they're particularly useful for getting rid of taking off wheel nuts from, let's say, stubborn places. And the way they work is like this. So that, and that's impact guns. It's starting to rain, so better get out of it. Now, the last two tools that I'll just go through, or air power tools I'll go through, is number one, an air spray gun. These are very straightforward to use. You hook your air at the back here, you unscrew the can, you put paint into the can, and generally I find that it works a little bit better if you thin it slightly with some thinners, as opposed to trying to sort of push thicker paint through a spray nozzle. Trigger here, so you press that, and then the paint sprays out this end. You can get different nozzles here to achieve a different spray pattern, whether it be heavy, vertical, horizontal, etc., etc. So that's spray guns. They're handy if you have a large volume of stuff to spray for spraying a chassis or something like that. The last tool then is one I picked up in a German discount supermarket, and what that is sort of a pin nailer. What do they call it? Pneumatic stapler. So sort of a light duty stapler slash pin gun, and very handy for small jobs. Bit of upholstery, tacking little bits of wood together, stuff like that. And the way it operates is fairly straightforward. We have nails in here. They slot at the back. The cartridge closes up. We'll connect here. And we just have a piece of wood here. We'll just demonstrate. And what that does then is it just pins into the wood there. So if you had trim or a skirting board or stuff like that to install that doesn't require a heavy fixing requirement. Little pin gun like this, very, very quick to operate, and you know, it can make a sort of a long job quite quick. Now we're into our unboxing section. So, small, effectively pretty much unknown branded compressor, 1200 watts, which is about 1.5 horsepower, thereabouts. 8 bar pressure, which I think is about 120 psi. 24 litre tank, which is about 5 gallons. Tells us that it operates at 3,450 revs per minute, and it gives 180 litres of air a minute. Sorry, it probably takes, well, it says it takes in 180 litres of air a minute. We'll have a look at that in a while now, because sometimes the quoted air intake or pumped is different than the air that you get out of the hose end, so to speak. Now, we have everything unboxed. I stuck the wheels on the back here, didn't tighten them up fully just yet, and there's a little rubber stand at the front underneath, which I also stuck on. What we'll do is we'll go through the accessory kit first and just identify what came with that, and then we'll go through the compressor itself. So our accessory kit came with a little extension coil of hose, which is quite light, but it'll do the job fine. Let our expectations not be too high with the price point of this. We also came with one quick release fitting. We'll hold him up there. They're threaded at the back, and I think it's 3/8 BSP thread, and that should fit into here, and it does. And all of these accessories also came with the same thread on the bottom of them, which goes into here. We have a roll of PTFE tape, which is called plumber's tape. It's just a very light white tape, and what that's used for is sealing the threads between the connections so as to ensure no leaks of air. So we have our coil of hose, we have one quick release fitting, we have a little blowgun, little sort of pistol type, fairly straightforward, and we identified that already, or demonstrated that already. We have a tire gauge with the pressure gauge on the back of it. And on the front end, we have a little spring-loaded retention clip for holding onto the valves on tires, which is grand. This one here in particular has a little black button here for releasing the air pressure if you overinflate something slightly. So that's that fella. We have a paint gun. Again, we demonstrated that already. They're very basic, you know, quite a cheap, commonly found item. This is a suction system whereby the paint goes into the can, and this fella here at the bottom, this pipe here, sucks the paint up. As the air passes by, atomizes the paint, which means basically break it down into very small droplets, and then obviously lands on the surface of whatever you point the nozzle towards. And then the last thing that came with this is what's called a washing gun. So I had to go and look this up myself. These are similar enough to spray guns, whereby you can deliver a lot more volume of material down into the spray, and this one in particular comes with a thumb screw here, which adjusts the flow of liquid down into the head, and you can also adjust the flow of air passing through it to balance up whatever you're trying to spray. This one is listed as using it for detergents or light oils or stuff like that, but I have a feeling that you could probably use it for thinned paint as well. Obviously, if it's very thick or very viscous, it won't flow and it won't atomize nicely. There is a little spray head at the front, and you can adjust that for a horizontal spray, or you turn it sideways then and tighten in this fella for a vertical spray, depending on what you're trying to do. Okay, so that's those. We'll park them aside, and what we'll do is we'll go through the compressor itself now. Now, first impressions are that the accessories are cheapish, very lightly made, but at the same time, there's enough there to get us going to do what we need to do. So we'll just take over our compressor now, and as I said, what I did was I stuck the wheels on, and there's a little stand at the front here, a little rubber foot, so that it sits level on the ground. Now, this is quite nicely made for what it is. Little handle at the front for moving it around. There's also a little handle at the back, which is a nice touch if you need to lift it in and out of anything. It's quite light, or you know, not mad light, but it's, you know, you could certainly lift it into the back of a car or Jeep if you had to. So what we have on this side is an on-off switch, and then, and I'm trying to do this on the basis now that you've never seen a compressor before. Right, on the top here now, what we have is a pressure gauge, a quick release valve for connecting that hose onto, and then this big orange button here regulates the pressure coming out of the hose. When we plug in the machine and turn it on, it'll come up to pressure itself without anything attached to it, and the tank will hold 8 bar, which is about 120 psi, and that's its operating characteristic, so to speak. This button then here that turns plus and minus, and there's a plus and minus underneath the front there, it regulates the amount of pressure coming out. So if you want 50 psi, the tank will always fill up to the 120 psi or 8 bar, but you control the pressure coming out of the hose with this orange button here. So that's the top, the business end, so to speak. And then underneath, we'll hold this up here, you have a little drain valve at the bottom, and what that drain valve does is that over time, as you compress air, moisture comes out of the air and it'll sit at the bottom of the tank. And obviously you don't want water going into paint or whatever you're trying to spray or whatever. So what you can do is open that valve. It's sort of another little thumb screw again, obviously sitting down flat, and let the water be blown out or drain out of that. I think the recommended practice is that you let all the air out of the compressor and then open this and just let it drain. Sometimes I find though that a little bit of pressure in the tank helps the water flow out of it. So that's the drain valve underneath. You'll need to do that depending on how often you use the compressor. You know, call it routine maintenance. On the side then here, and this is one that you don't really touch ever yourself, this is a pressure relief valve, and that's factory set. That will say if there's something goes wrong with the motor or the control system on this, that'll bleed off excess pressure. So if you hear that valve on the side, on the top generally, bleeding off pressure, that implies you've one of two problems. Number one, your pressure relief switch to turn off the motor and stop the tank compressing is broken or needs adjustment or replacement. Or secondly, the little valve itself might be faulty. One way or the other, you have to fix it. So, going back now to getting started, what we'll do is we'll take the blowgun, we'll organize that, attach that in such a way that we can actually clean something with it. And what I'm going to do now is plug in and turn on the air compressor and let it charge up. And we'll time it to see how quickly it does that. Right, away we go. Right, our compressor's up the compressor, and while that was doing there, I measured the flats on these fittings to see what spanners I needed to organize. So basically what we'll do is we'll put our little quick release fitting on one end, and it plugs into the quick release female side of this. This is a Euro style quick release fitting, and just for comparison, here in Ireland we come across two different types. This is sort of an older style, it's called PCL, and I think that's a sort of a proprietary brand. This one, the Euro style, is sort of shorter, and if we can compare the two, you can see it's sort of shorter and thicker than the PCL side, and it's slightly wider inside as well, so that would increase airflow as well. Any time you see a narrowing of a tube or a connection, it obviously leads to sort of a decrease in airflow. So what we'll do is we'll take our tape, now, plumber's tape and gloves, not a great match. So we take our tape, we'll wrap the threads of this in the tape and pull it quite tight. Okay. One. Stick him in there. And then we'll use our 2 spanners to tighten. In this particular instance, I have a 14 and a 16 mil spanner. I'll give that a good tighten. Right, so that's our plug side of it, which will fit in here. We won't stick that in yet now because we've nothing connected to the far side. And we'll do the same with the thread on the tool itself. Right. And if you use a little bit too much PTFE tape, you can always trim it afterwards. Right, with that hand tightened up there. Right, so we've connected our air gun here to one end of that coiled hose, and we have the quick release on the other end. Now what I've found very handy is that you can buy separate fittings for the quick release, and you can effectively turn the coiled hose into an extension lead. This here is a Euro style coupling which fits into this fella like that. So theoretically we can screw him directly into one end of this, get a few more quick release couplings of this size, and then what we have is an interchangeable system. Just to be aware that the 2 tools that you'll probably be using the most, certainly to start with, is the blow gun and the tire inflator. So if you get an additional plug, this fella here, and an additional quick release socket or a female section of it, what you can do then is you can have interchangeability between the tools. Right, our compressor's up to pressure, and we have our tool attached. So what we'll do then is stick this in here, okay, and what we have then is a functional tool. Okay. Right, now that we have our air compressor and tooling set up and it's of some use to us, what we'll look at now is some of the more technical aspects, or some beginners technical aspects, so to speak. Now, firstly, what we regard as an air compressor, it's effectively made up of 2 parts. The compressor unit itself here, which comprises the motor and a little pump, and then a storage tank to give us some buffer storage. It is possible to get some very high air delivery compression units with very small tanks, but with very large motors. And then conversely, a large tank and a small motor is also possible. But once you exhaust the contents of the tank, the compressor obviously then will take a long time to fill up again. Now, you can also get compressors with no tanks at all, such as those used for inflating bouncy castles, inflatable pools, air beds, etc. And this one here is quite a good little example. This is one that goes in the car. It's powered from a car's electrical output. It has a little hose here on the side for attaching to the tyre if the tyre is flat, and then you just press the button to turn it on. Comes with a light as well and some other few bits and pieces. It's a little sort of a rescue tool rather than anything else, but that has no tank on it. It's a direct motor connected to the tyre or whatever you connect it to. Now, generally speaking, when we talk about air compressors and air tools, we'll use 2 generally accepted pressure ratings. One is PSI, which is pounds per square inch, and the other then is bar, which is sort of a unit of atmospheric pressure. The conversion ratio between 1 bar and PSI is, I think, 14.7. I round it to 15 just for ease of use. So a unit like this, which has 8 bar in the tank, that's equivalent to 120 PSI stored in the tank pressure-wise. Some air compressors will have a gauge measuring the pressure in the tank. Other ones will have a gauge measuring the pressure on the output line, which you can adjust generally. And then some compressors will have 2 different gauges. So keep an eye on your gauge that it's not automatically registering the pressure in the tank or registering the outlet pressure. What we look at then is if you want to progress onto sort of more demanding applications like an impact gun or paint spraying or things like that, then we start to look at the requirements or the capability of the machine to actually give us a flow of air equivalent to what the tool will use. Some of these tools are particularly air hungry. Paint spraying is quite high. Air-powered sanding tools, air-powered rotary tools, even some air impact guns are quite heavy on their use of air. Right, and what I'm trying to get to here is the size of the tank isn't of huge relevance when it comes to running sort of air-hungry tools. It's the size of the compressor unit and its ratings. This one here is rated as 1.5 horsepower, which I think is about 1200 watts or 1.2 kilowatts. The next stage up from this generally has a 50-litre tank, which would be about 10 gallons, and they'd run at the sort of the 2 horsepower or 1.5 kilowatt or 1500 watt output. And from an air delivery point of view, they do give us a bit more air. Now, the ratings by which these machines are rated at as regards air delivery should be free air delivery. I noticed with this one here, when we looked up the specs, there's no actual spec for free air delivery, but what it tells us is that the intake rate, theoretical, is approximately 180 litres per minute. So if it can take in 180 litres, that means then that it has to squash that down 6 or 8 times to give us the 90 or 120 psi pressure in the tank, or 6 to 8 bar, depending. So my calculation, or rough calculation, then would be that we'd have to divide that 180 litres by 6 or 8 to give us the airflow that will actually deliver out on the outlet side. So you have to be very careful when you're buying air compressors that the quoted figures for air are actually free air delivery, and it should be free air delivery at a particular pressure. This one is an oil-free unit, okay? And effectively what that means is that the little piston or the mechanism for pumping the air is coated in something, possibly Teflon or something like that, and it doesn't need lubrication. It's sort of factory lubrication, so to speak. Now, the plus side is that there'll be no oil possibly getting into the tank. So from a spray painting point of view, you won't have contaminants in paint. On the downside then, the oil-free ones tend to wear out a bit quicker, and they're not designed for sort of heavy duty use or commercial use. Now we're set up here, and what we have is our compressor full, and the tank is measuring 8 bar. I turn down the pressure regulator here so that it'll give us 6 bar, which is 90 psi, and I have a ratchet gun attached to the hose. Just to demonstrate, number one, what little capacity there is in a very small 24 litre or around 5 gallon tank. And secondly as well, is to show that this gauge here is showing the output pressure that we've set, and that should maintain at 90 psi, but it won't. So we'll just run this now and I'll show you. Now, as you can see, this little tank and this little compressor would not give us out 90 psi whilst we're running this tool, and it wouldn't even allow us set the gauge to 90 psi because it kept dropping. Now the last section of this, I'm going to just show you how to drain a tank. This is a much larger compressor. It has a 200 litre tank, which is about 40 gallons or 45 gallons, somewhere there. So all tanks will have a little drain valve, probably located at the bottom of them. It's the logical place for it. So effectively what you do is you stick a little dish or a cup or something like that underneath it. And what we'll do then is we'll just loosen off our little thumb screw here. And then we can demonstrate what comes out of the bottom of a tank. Now here in Ireland we have a particularly sort of wet and humid environment, so especially over the winter what I find is that I'd have to empty this weekly anyway and take the excess moisture out. And generally what I do is just set it going like this. Generally there isn't too much water in it, but just leave it sit there with a little bit of pressure on. There's about 30 psi in the tank at the moment, and just leave it sit there and it dribbles away then and it tidies itself out. Now just to close out, we've gone through the uses of an air compressor for pumping tires, cleaning stuff off with an air gun. We've set up our new little unit here as regards connections, so on and so forth. And then we had a look at some of the basic technical details. Overall, my recommendation would be that a small compressor like this is of great value to any workshop or even any home, whatever. I would recommend though going up a step, going from the 24 litre 1.5 horsepower unit up to a 50 litre 2 horsepower unit, just to give you a little bit of buffer there if you do want to run a spray gun or some type of air tool or something like that. So other than that, if you have any questions or queries or stuff like that, feel free to ask them in the comments. I might be able to answer them, but somebody else watching might reply to that comment with an answer for you. Okay, that's about it. We'll see you next time.